The chandelier light spilled like liquid gold across the marble floor of the six-star hotel in Dubai, every detail screaming wealth and power. Guests in gowns and tuxedos laughed too loudly, their glasses catching sparks of crystal and fire. In the middle of that world, carrying a tray heavier than her arms wanted to admit, stood Naomi Carter. At 26, she was only seen as a waitress in a black apron and worn shoes, but behind her steady eyes lived stories far bigger than the tables she served. She had covered this shift for a coworker, even though her phone had buzzed just an hour earlier with the message that crushed her chest. Insurance denied Mom's treatment again. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and forced her hands not to tremble. Tonight, she had to stand tall. Naomi walked past the entrance guard, who took a second too long to scan her badge, his gaze questioning as if her skin or her uniform was out of place here. A wealthy woman pulled her clutch tighter when Naomi passed. Another guest whispered, "They're really pushing diversity tonight." Soft words, but sharp enough to cut. Naomi exhaled slowly, remembering her father's lessons. Breathe before you respond. Hold your dignity like armor. She placed glasses on the tables, careful, graceful, and silent. At table 1, however, the air was different, thicker with pride and arrogance. At its center sat Omar Khalid, a billionaire in a tailored suit, his smile too polished to hide the steel behind it. Around him gathered senators, ambassadors, socialites, and his own daughter Issa, who watched everything with quiet eyes. Naomi leaned forward to set down a crystal glass in front of him. The wine rippled slightly but did not spill. Yet Omar's gaze lingered not on the glass but on her face, his lips curving into a sneer. In smooth Arabic, certain she would not understand, he said to his companions, "A lowly creature like her dares touch my crystal glass." Laughter burst around the table like fireworks. Naomi froze for a second, her hand tightening on the tray, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had been mocked before, but never like this. Never in words meant to exclude, never in a language meant to be a secret weapon. The laughter grew, rolling around her like smoke, feeding on the belief that she could not comprehend. Naomi bowed her head, pretending for a heartbeat that she was deaf to the insult, but then she lifted her gaze. Her brown eyes, steady as fire, fixed on him. And in flawless Arabic, her voice calm yet carrying to every corner of the table, she replied, "The crystal glass does not lower the one who holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." Silence fell like a blade. Forks stopped midair, glasses hovered half-raised, and the laughter choked itself into silence. One of the senators blinked, whispering, "She understands Arabic?" A ripple of shock crossed faces painted with arrogance only moments earlier. Even Issa Khalid's eyes widened with a glimmer of something, relief, maybe even pride, that someone had finally spoken truth to her father. Naomi stood straight, the silver tray at her side like a soldier's shield, her words hanging in the air like a challenge no one expected. The chandeliers still blazed, but the true light in the room had shifted. It was no longer the billionaire at the head of the table. It was the waitress they thought they could laugh at. For a long breath, no one at the table moved. Naomi's words in flawless Arabic still hovered above them like smoke refusing to clear. Then, as pride does when wounded, the guest tried to laugh it away. One woman in a yellow gown tapped her fork against her plate, the sound sharp. "Parrot tricks," she said in English. "Anyone can memorize a phrase." Another guest chuckled nervously. Omar leaned back, his lips curved, though his eyes no longer danced with confidence. "Say something more," Evelyn Ward pressed, her smile brittle. "Or are you just a one-trick pony?" The challenge dangled like bait in the air. The laughter returned, cautious this time, as though the room tested its own courage. Naomi inhaled. Her mentor's voice echoed in her memory. "Words are power. Use them when the silence is heaviest." She placed her tray gently on the side table, stood tall, and began. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her tone. In that same flawless Arabic, she recited a verse by al-Mutanabi, each syllable gliding like water over stone, each pause sharp as a chisel. The consonants curled with precision, the vowels stretched with patience, and the cadence struck at something ancient in every listener, even those who didn't understand the words. The hall, once thick with chatter, now stilled into reverence. A spoon dropped at a far table and the sound echoed as if it were thunder. At table 1, Dr. Ibrahim Hale, a gray-templed scholar of Middle Eastern literature, lowered his fork and whispered, "Extraordinary." His voice trembled with awe. "This is not memorization. This is lived language. This is mastery." The weight of his words silenced the skeptics. For a moment, Naomi's voice carried dignity higher than any title in that room. Issa Khalid's eyes glimmered, her hands gripping the napkin in front of her, as if holding back a cheer. Yet Omar Khalid could not stand it. He tilted his head, lips curling with arrogance. "Poetry is easy," he said smoothly. "Eloquence does not equal understanding." His voice cut through the quiet like a knife. He nodded toward Nick Harper, the media mogul seated nearby. Nick leaned forward, switching to rapid Arabic, tossing out a question about shipping lanes, trade tariffs, and fluctuating markets, a dense labyrinth designed to entangle. "Let us see," Omar murmured in English, "if she understands more than rehearsed lines." Senator Brooks laughed, rough and loud. "Yes, as let's test the waitress." Clara Price smirked over her glass of wine, certain Naomi would fall. All eyes turned to her. Naomi listened without interrupting, her head tilted slightly, her gaze distant, as if sketching a map in her mind. The guests smirked, waiting for her silence to stretch into defeat. But when she opened her mouth, her reply in Arabic was steady, deliberate, and precise. First, she broke down the problem into 3 routes: Gulf to Red Sea, Mediterranean through transshipment ports, and the South Asia detour. Next, she explained the impact of insurance windows, demand elasticity, and risk calculations under shifting tariffs. She didn't just answer, she taught, breaking the question into clear logic, her voice calm as if she were leading a classroom. The room froze. Dr. Hale's eyes widened further. "Remarkable," he breathed. Even Ambassador Lydia Grant leaned forward, her diplomatic pin catching the chandelier's light. Evelyn's mocking smile cracked. Clara's wineglass wavered. And Omar? His polished composure had thinned into something raw. His daughter Issa no longer hid her reaction. She looked at Naomi with something fierce, admiration. The laughter was gone. The sneers were gone. What filled the air now was something heavier, respect laced with unease. Omar's jaw tightened. He muttered low in Arabic, his voice like steel dragged across stone. "Who are you?" Naomi stood tall, her hands steady at her sides, her heart pounding but her voice unshaken. She met his gaze without flinching. "I am the one you thought invisible," she answered softly in Arabic. And with those words, the balance of power in the room shifted once more. The air in the banquet hall held a strange stillness, as though the chandeliers themselves leaned closer to listen. Naomi's calm declaration, "I am the one you thought invisible," settled over the table like a veil that refused to be lifted. Omar Khalid's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak again, Senator Brooks grumbled into his glass. "Well, maybe she rehearsed it all."
She probably Googled a few phrases. His words were enough to spark weak laughter from those still desperate to believe Naomi's brilliance was a trick. Yet the laughter sounded hollow, as though even they didn't believe it. Issa's gaze lingered on Naomi, her lips pressing tight as though she wanted to say something, but chose silence instead. In the pause that followed, Naomi's mind drifted, not because she wanted to, but because the weight of the moment demanded she remember how she had come to stand here. Her father's voice echoed in memory, warm and firm. "Naomi, language is not just words. It is bridges. It is respect. It is power." He had been a linguist, a man who spent years translating at international forums, weaving worlds together through words. He raised her in a home filled with books, with evenings where Arabic poetry danced alongside French philosophy and African proverbs. She was barely 10 when she translated her first short story, her father smiling with pride. But then life bent the family under its cruel hand. Her father passed away suddenly, leaving her mother to carry the burden alone. Scholarships helped Naomi study, but not enough. When her mother's health collapsed, The dream of a PhD in linguistics slipped through Naomi's fingers. Bills piled higher than essays, and instead of teaching at universities, she carried trays across polished floors that rarely reflected her dignity. The weight of that history lived inside her as she stood before the table now. They thought she was a waitress with thrift store shoes. In truth, she was a scholar silenced by circumstance. Naomi's back straightened, her pride rekindled in quiet fire. The room, however, bristled with unease. Some guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable not because Naomi lacked knowledge, but because her knowledge dared to outshine theirs. Clara Price whispered sharply, "Even if she's seen, beautied a little, she's still serving drinks. That says enough." Evelyn laughed softly in agreement, the brittle sound of insecurity disguised as superiority. Omar, refusing to lose his grip, leaned forward again. His voice, smooth yet laced with steel, slipped once more into Arabic. This time he spoke not of trade, but of heritage. He quoted a proverb, twisting it into insult. Even if a donkey wears a saddle, it does not become a horse. The table erupted again in cruel chuckles, relieved to return to familiar ground, mockery. Naomi's chest burned, but she did not lower her gaze. She replied in Arabic, her words sharp and deliberate, her tone carrying centuries of pride. And yet, even a horse tied in the shadows is still a horse. Its strength is not lessened because others fail to see it. The silence that followed was sharper than any laughter. The scholar at the table, Dr. Hale, nearly dropped his fork. Ambassador Grant leaned closer, whispering, "Brilliant." Issa's face softened, her eyes bright with something fierce. Omar's smirk, however, faltered for the first time. He reached for his glass, masking his unease with a sip of wine, but his fingers gripped the stem too tightly. Naomi's words had not only countered his insult, they had turned it back on him, a mirror reflecting arrogance into its own eyes. And for the first time that evening, Naomi felt it, the shift. The room no longer saw a waitress standing with a tray. They saw a woman with a fire no wealth could purchase. The cracks in Omar's armor of power had begun to show, and beneath the chandeliers, his humiliation was only just beginning. The banquet hall pulsed with tension, as if every chandelier light burned hotter, reflecting the unspoken shift in power. Omar Khalid's laughter had always commanded rooms, but now it fell hollow against Naomi's steady fire. His fingers tapped restlessly on the tablecloth, the rhythm betraying unease. Yet pride is a stubborn beast. Instead of yielding, he doubled down. "Enough games," he said in Arabic, his tone sharp as broken glass.
You are here to serve, not to lecture. Know your place." The words cracked through the air like a whip. Several guests straightened, relieved by the return of arrogance, clinging to the hierarchy they understood. Naomi's chest tightened, the old instinct whispering to shrink back, to apologize, to make herself small. But then her phone vibrated in her pocket, and in that moment, she remembered why she stood tall. A glance at the screen revealed the message she dreaded: insurance denied again. Immediate payment required. Her mother's life had just been reduced to paperwork. Pain surged through her, but instead of breaking her, it hardened her spine. She set the tray down on the side table with quiet precision, every movement deliberate. Then she turned, meeting Omar's eyes without flinching. "Respect," she said in Arabic, her voice low but carrying across the table, "is not a favor you give. It is a truth you either recognize or ignore. But truth does not change because you choose blindness." A hush spread again. Issa leaned forward, her young face lit with awe. Ambassador Grant nodded almost imperceptibly, a diplomat recognizing dignity when she heard it. Yet Clara Price sneered, her pearls catching the light. "She's overstepping," Clara muttered in English. "Too bold for a server." Evelyn agreed, smirking as though boldness from the powerless was a crime. Their words dripped with discomfort, not because Naomi was wrong, but because she shattered the fragile comfort of their superiority. Omar rose to his feet, his shadow stretching across the table like a storm cloud. "You do not belong here," he snapped, his voice louder, drawing glances from nearby tables. "This hall is for leaders, not for those who carry plates." His fury sought to reduce her back to silence, to strip away the dignity she had claimed. A security guard, noticing the rising tension, shifted close, waiting for a signal. Naomi's heart pounded, but her father's lessons whispered within. When others shout, let your calmness be thunder. She lifted her chin, her voice steady, her words like polished stone. Leadership is not measured by wealth or seats at a table. It is measured by the strength to lift others, not push them down. Her words, spoken in perfect Arabic, rang louder than Omar's anger. Gasps rippled. A few guests lowered their eyes, ashamed. Dr. Hale murmured, "Magnificent." Even Senator Brooks, though grumbling, looked unsettled. Issa's hand trembled slightly as she placed her napkin on the table, her eyes never leaving Naomi. For the first time, Omar faltered. His anger met resistance, not submission, and the mask of his dominance cracked. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint strains of the string quartet in the corner, their music suddenly sounding like a score to history. The security guard hesitated, uncertain now whether to act. The air itself seemed to wait, heavy with a question. Had the waitress just outshone the billionaire? Omar's jaw tightened, his pride battling humiliation. But Naomi did not look away. She stood steady, her dignity carved into the very space between them. And in that moment, everyone at the table realized something dangerous to their hierarchy. Respect, once claimed, could not be taken back. The silence after Naomi's words was heavier than stone. Guests shifted in their seats, caught between fear of Omar's wrath and awe at the courage standing before them in a waitress's uniform. Omar's chest rose and fell with controlled fury, his eyes dark, his pride wounded deeper than wealth could mend. He opened his mouth to strike again, but before the words could leave, a soft but firm voice cut across the tension. "Father, enough." All eyes turned to Issa Khalid. The young woman had been quiet through Mosin. Teat of the evening, her gaze observant, her lips pressed thin while mockery rolled around the table. But now she stood, her chair scraping against the marble floor. Her presence commanding more than her father expected. "This is not strength," she said in clear English, her voice trembling yet resolute. "This is humiliation. Not for her, for us." Omar's face hardened, the sting of betrayal flashing across his features. "Sit down, Issa," he hissed in Arabic. But Issa did not. She kept her eyes on Naomi, her expression filled with something no one else dared show: admiration. "Her words carry more wisdom than half the speeches I've heard in international halls," she said softly. "And I study international relations. I know the difference between mimicry and mastery." The guests stirred, whispers fluttering like restless birds. Evelyn's smile faded. Clara looked away. For the first time, the balance tilted toward Naomi, not just by silence, but by open defense. A voice broke the moment further. Dr. Hale, the scholar, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. "Miss," he said to Naomi, "who taught you? Your fluency, your depth. It is rare even among scholars." The question hung, drawing every ear. Naomi hesitated. For years she had carried her story quietly, ashamed of the gap between her abilities and her circumstances. But standing here with the truth demanded of her, she lifted her chin. "My father," she said softly. "He was a linguist. He translated for leaders, scholars, poets. He believed words were bridges, not weapons. He raised me in those bridges." Her voice caught, but she did not falter. "I was supposed to continue his path, but when he died and my mother fell sick, I put aside the classroom for the tray. That does not erase what he gave me. Knowledge does not vanish because I wear an apron." A murmur rolled across the table. Ambassador Grant's sharp eyes softened, her lips parting in recognition. Issa smiled faintly, pride shimmering in her gaze. Clara, however, muttered, "Sentimental stories don't change the fact she's still a server." But even her words sounded brittle now, stripped of power. Omar's fury simmered, his pride clinging desperately. "Enough of this charade," he barked. "Do not elevate a waitress into a professor." Yet Issa answered him, her voice sharper now. "Perhaps we should. Perhaps she is a professor, of dignity, of courage. Things we clearly forgot." The table fell quiet, Issa's words a blade slicing through arrogance. Naomi's breath shook, but she stood taller, the truth of her legacy revealed. She was no longer invisible, no longer a shadow at the edge of wealth's table. She was a voice, undeniable and resonant. The room had shifted, and even Omar, for all his fury, could not unmake what had been spoken. The humiliation was no longer hers. It had found its rightful place. The hall seemed to breathe with Naomi now. Every eye that once mocked her now lingered with reluctant awe, curiosity, or quiet shame. Omar Khalid, red with fury, stood rigid, his pride battling against a truth he could no longer deny. Before he could unleash another dismissal, the ambassador rose. Lydia Grant, elegant in her diplomatic pin, lifted her glass. "Miss Carter," she said in polished Arabic, "you honor this table. Few speak with such clarity, fewer still with such humility. Would you join me at the embassy next week? I believe your insight deserves more than whispers in a banquet hall." The offer struck the air like thunder. Naomi's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she doubted her ears, but the warmth in the ambassador's eyes was undeniable. Dr. Hale leaned forward eagerly. "I would be honored to sponsor her return to study," he added, his scholar's pride shining. "This brilliance must not be wasted on service shifts." Issa, glowing with relief, looked at Naomi with open admiration. "Professor," she whispered in English, the word deliberate, a quiet coronation before the table, Clara's. Pearls rattled against her glass as her hand trembled. Evelyn lowered her eyes, shame painted across her face. The guard who had hovered earlier relaxed his stance, realizing the storm he had prepared for had shifted into something he could never control. Omar, cornered by dignity stronger than his arrogance, forced a laugh. "This is absurd," he spat. "You're all enchanted by a performance." Yet his voice lacked the iron it once carried. His daughter's eyes did not waver from Naomi, and the silence of the guests around him made his denial sound weaker still. Naomi, however, did not gloat. She bowed her head slightly, her voice calm. "Respect is not performance," she said. "It is truth, and truth always remains, whether spoken by a king or a servant." Her words struck harder than any shout, and Omar's glass slipped in his hand, the wine staining the white tablecloth like a wound. The irony was not lost. His power, his perfection, undone by his own trembling hand. Just then, Naomi's phone buzzed in her apron pocket again. Her heart clenched as she glanced at it. But this time, the message was different. Payment confirmed, treatment approved, immediate admission arranged. Her breath hitched, eyes blurring for a moment. She looked up, scanning the table, and caught the faintest nod from Ambassador Grant. A kindness had been done quietly, without announcement. The storm inside her eased into a trembling peace. Her mother's chance had been secured not by her pleading but by the dignity she had refused to surrender. The banquet continued, but nothing was the same. Naomi no longer blended into the shadows. She was sought out, spoken to, and respected as though she had been a guest all along. Issa walked beside her as she left, whispering, "Thank you for reminding me what strength looks like." Naomi smiled faintly, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. Outside, the desert night stretched wide and endless, the stars above like scattered diamonds. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. And as she walked home, her teeth, Ray left behind in the glittering hall, one truth settled deep into her heart. Respect is not given by wealth nor stolen by cruelty. It is claimed by those who carry it within. Moral: never judge by the uniform, the skin, or the station. The dignity of a person is greater than the glass in their hand. Respect everyone, for you never know who truly stands before you.